Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of the Speed Reading 101 podcast brought to you by the IRIS organization. I'm Paul Novak, founder of the IRIS organization, and I'm joined here with one of our instructors, Joe Rodriguez, based out of Toronto, and I'm based here in Chicago. Hey, Joe.
Hey, Paul. How's it going?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. So my name is Joe Rodriguez. I am an instructor for the IRIS organization. I teach the classes in Toronto, and I also have a speed reading blog that I've recently put up. It's been up for about a few weeks now. You can check out my speed reading related information at speedreadingzone.com.
And in terms of the classes that IRIS provides, we provide them in 21 cities throughout the U.S. and in Canada. You can check those out at irisreading.com. Today what we're going to be covering is the topic of retention. So Joe and I, both of us, have been teaching these classes, and we teach these speed reading classes, and it's not just about your speed, because if you're going really fast, if you can't remember what you read, it really doesn't matter how fast you're going, right, Joe?
Yep, that's a big one, because we get a lot of students that take these classes, university students, and they're taking these classes because they want to retain that information that they're reading. So we've got some excellent tips and strategies and information. In fact, we're dedicating this entire podcast to the whole topic of retention that we're going to share with you, the same stuff that we talk about in our classes.
That's right. And before we get started here, I just want to give everyone a heads up that's listening in. We just set up a phone number and an email where you guys can send us your questions. If you want to email us your questions, we will answer them in a future podcast. You can send them to podcast@irisreading.com, or you can leave us a voicemail with your question at 315-313-IRIS. And that's actually, the numbers are 4747. But you can remember it as, again, 315-313-4747. And feel free to send us your comments, your questions, and we will read them on air. We'll answer them in a future podcast. And I'd also like to quickly, before we get into the topic of retention, I want to talk about this new application that we recently launched. It's called the Accelerator, and you can get it at accelerator.com. That's spelled A-C-C-E-L-A, and the word reader.com. The great thing about this application, it is a great way to get an immediate boost in your reading speed. Joe, you want to talk a little bit about, because we've been kind of showcasing this in some of our classes, what's been the reaction with students out there in Toronto?
Actually, this has probably been one of the highlight of the classes that we teach. And the reason is because it helps you read information faster when you're reading it on a computer. And the type of technology that it's based on is RSVP, which stands for Rapid Serial Visual Presentation. So essentially, if you have a bunch of text that you want to read really fast, you copy the text and you paste it in the accelerator.com website, and it's completely free, and it converts it into a video format where it plays one word at a time, or you could change it to 2 or 3 words at a time, and you can even adjust the speed. And essentially by looking, it plays it in a video like in the center of the screen, and by looking at the center of the screen as it plays, you're able to take in that information a lot faster because your eyes are not moving left and right, and also it's a lot easier on your eyes than if you're reading traditionally.
Right, and one of the things I've looked at, there have been research studies into this method of reading, which, as Joe mentioned, is called RSVP, which stands for Rapid Serial Visual Presentation. RSVP is at the basis of a lot of speed reading software programs. Some of these software programs are pretty expensive, and one of the things that we're trying to do is kind of let this technology out there in the form of the Accelerator to give it away as free, because this is a very, very useful way to boost your reading speed, and also actually helps with, they've done some research on not only people improving their reading speed with this, but also comprehension. They're attributing people's higher comprehension rates to the fact that when you're looking at these words blink at you, 1 or 2 or 3 words at a time, you're focusing all your attention just in one place. Whereas if you were normally reading an article online, you'd be reading the article, scrolling down some, running into ads here and there, and a lot of people, when they're reading on the screen, they find themselves usually reading a little more slowly than they would if they were reading it on the printed page.
Yeah, and another part of that is the type of font selection is not always kept in consideration when websites are developed or even blogs are laid out, or even text and email. And with Accelerator, you can paste the text in there, and it puts it in, you know what the font it uses?
I don't know the default font, but I know that you can change it. And the other thing that's nice, because like you mentioned, Joe, sometimes the text is not formatted in a font that's easy to read. I think this is especially true when you're reading on your phone. And one of the things that we're working on right now is creating the Accelerator as an iPhone app and also an Android app, because I think it's perfect. You know, you ever try reading on your phone? It's an absolutely terrible experience, right, Joe?
Yeah, I know. I read a lot on my phone. I read a lot on my iPhone. I read ebooks on my iPhone. So it's something like Accelerator, where the text displays a certain way. You're able to read a lot more efficiently.
Right, and it keeps you on pace. You know, you can set up one of the things, just to recap how it works, the application is very simple to use. You go to accelerator.com and you copy your text, you paste it in there, and you click read. Once you click read, you only set up 2 parameters. How fast do you want to read, and how many words do you want to see at a time? So a nice thing about the app is that you can pretty much pace yourself. You can say, you know what, let me try reading at 400 words a minute, which is double the average reading speed. And let me see if I could actually maintain that. So it's useful for reading. I think it's also useful as a practice tool if you're serious about trying to learn how to read faster.
And that's what I tell my students, because the material that we cover in the first half of the class is a lot of drills. They're not drills related to any online materials, reading offline material. Once I train them on the concepts of speed reading, all the techniques and strategies, once we cover all that stuff, I then tell them in the second half to practice that stuff using Accelerator. So Accelerator is essentially based on all the great information out there pertaining to speed reading, all the research and information that's out there that is geared towards helping you read faster. Accelerator is based on that. So, and it's completely free. So I recommend that you guys go to accelerator.com and give it a shot. And also, like Paul mentioned, leave us some feedback. Let us know what you think about it, or ways we can improve it, because this is recently launched, and we're looking to make revisions based on the feedback that we get.
Absolutely. And again, the number where you can send us your questions regarding this podcast is 315-313-4747, or by email at podcast@irisreading.com. So,
all right,
Joe, let's go ahead and talk about, actually, Joe, you mentioned there's actually a promo that, courtesy of your blog, for the classes that we're doing here in the U.S. and also Toronto.
Yeah, based on the fact that I just launched my blog a couple of weeks ago, and I'm pretty excited about that. I partnered up with.
Overly promotional. What is your blog? Go ahead and just say it, so everyone knows.
It's a speed reading blog. It's all kinds of information on speed reading. So all the information I've recently gotten into writing. So what better way to do it than write about something that I have a lot of information about? So I put up this blog, and I've been writing on it. And in celebration for the launch of this blog, we're giving away a special promo where you get a 25% discount on the IRIS speed reading workshops, available in many cities across the U.S. and Toronto and Canada. So any one of those workshops, you can get a 25% discount by simply entering the promo code speedreadingzone.com. Enter that promo code at the Google checkout, and you can save 25% on your next class.
Great, and I just want to mention, at Joe's blog, he's got a lot of great information. He's been teaching a number of these classes for us here at IRIS in Toronto, and he's also going to be teaching these classes in a number of other cities in the U.S. There's a lot of good content there. In fact, we're beginning to tell, since Joe launched the podcast, the blog, we're telling a lot of the students in our class as a follow-up to get more information to actually check out the blog. So go to speedreadingzone.com, and there's a lot of useful tips and pieces of some golden nuggets of information. So without further ado, let's get into retention, Joe. I want to start off by mentioning there is a difference between comprehension and retention. I know they're related, but some people think that comprehension includes retention, and there's actually a difference. Comprehension is what you're understanding the moment you're actually reading it, and retention is what do you remember later on. So I think all of us would agree that sometimes you've got great comprehension and absolutely terrible retention. So this is one thing to keep in mind, that this entire podcast, and we'll do a future podcast on comprehension, but this one is going to be dedicated to retention. Joe, do you want to start off and maybe kind of, let's touch the tip of the iceberg here and talk a little bit about retention?
Okay, so when it comes to retention, we have to understand what causes us to retain information, like how our brain works as far as information goes and retention goes. And it's important to understand that our brain deals a lot with visual information. And what I mean is, when you read something, let's say you read a sentence that says, "The boy jumped over the fence." Now, immediately after you read a sentence like that, you automatically get an image in your head of a boy jumping over a fence, right? Now, that's, for the most of us, we'll get that image. And that visual image right there is an important thing to understand. It's an important thing to understand why we see that image, because that right there is the key to understanding retention, right? So our brain actually sorts information out using visual cues. So consider that right there a visual cue. Okay? So now normally when we study, for example, we take notes after we read our material. That doesn't actually tie into that visual image. So what we need to do is we need to combine visual imagery with our note taking, and we do that using something called mind mapping. Okay, and what mind mapping is it's actually coined by Tony Buzan, and he has a great book on mind mapping. It's actually called the Mind Map book. Is that what it's called, Paul?
I can't remember the exact name. I think he's got a couple books out there.
Okay.
But he is kind of the person that coined that term, mind mapping. There's a number of other names for these, these kind of this way of note taking. I've heard it called recall patterns, web patterns, but I would say mind mapping is probably the most popular name for this way. And just to describe it to people visually, because we're doing a podcast here, so all you could hear is audio. I
just got the book here. I just pulled it up. It's called the Mind Map book: How to Use Radiant Thinking to Maximize Your Brain's Untapped Potential. So that's kind of like the first book he released on that whole subject. So I recommend that you check out that book if you want detailed information on mind mapping.
Right, and just to visually kind of describe how it looks, you start with the topic in the middle. The mind map at its most basic form would be, let's say, your main idea in the middle, and then your big concepts kind of drawn in circles around that main idea, and then details attached to each one of those big concepts. Now, you could make some extravagant mind maps by including, visual imagery and things like that. But Joe, you've been doing mind mapping for a number of years. I mean, it's not just useful as a way of taking notes. Here at Iris, we use it for brainstorming.
Yeah, I use it for some of the work that I do in the technology realm, because I also run a tech business. So when we're putting together products and networks and all that kind of stuff, we use mind mapping to map everything out. And essentially, mind mapping is images and keyword text put together all together on a piece of paper or a computer screen or whatever that depicts the information. Right, so I want to take it back a little bit, because we're kind of being very broad on mind mapping in relation to reading faster, or I should say retention when reading. Instead of taking linear notes, what I recommend is that you mind map your information. Get in the habit of mind mapping the information you read. So if you're doing something like reading the story of the boy who jumped over the fence, like a little example, you would draw the boy jumping over the fence, and then whatever else that involves that story, you would put in keywords as well as other little images. And what this does is this is a visual representation of the information that your brain is putting together, those visual representations. And by drawing it out, you're actually reaffirming that, right? So it's better than note-taking, because it's engaging that part of your brain that you normally don't engage when you take notes. I'm not saying that note-taking is a bad thing. I think you should use note-taking along with mind mapping if you want to get maximum retention.
Right, and I kind of think of, when I think of mind mapping, Joe, I actually think of it as a form of note-taking. I mean, there's a variety of ways you can take notes. You could do it in the margins. Some people just write it on, notebook paper. Some people are creating outlines, the traditional Roman numeral 1, A, B, Roman numeral 2, and so on. Some people are even highlighting, but mind mapping can be used as either a substitute or a supplement to your traditional note-taking.
And the reason why it's so beneficial is it's engaging both parts of your brain. So there's a lot to the study of the brain. But if we just keep it for simplicity reasons, say the brain is divided into two parts, like general speaking. We've got a left side of our brain and the right side. The right side is responsible for artistic and visual, and the left side is more linear, which fits in more with the linear style note-taking that we normally do. So when we take notes without images, we're not engaging the right side of the brain. And if we don't engage that right side of the brain, we're missing out on a huge potential of imprinting that information in our brain when our attempt is to retain it longer. So we're really missing out there. So by doing this, you're engaging both parts of your brain more effectively.
And another thing I want to mention about mind mapping, because some people, they look at mind mapping and they see this little drawing of, main idea in the middle, surrounded by other big concepts. Let's say, for example, imagine the chapter name. Let's say you're reading a textbook, and the chapter name is in the middle, and then you have the big concepts. Those are like the headings and subheadings of your chapter surrounding it visually. The thing about mind mapping that's different, because some people say isn't this basically an outline? And I've done outlines before, but the problem with outlines is that it shows information in a sequential manner. For example, Roman numeral 1 and Roman numeral 2, that implies that 2 comes after 1. Now, that's useful if you're taking notes on something like history, but it's not very useful when you're taking notes on something that's a little more nonlinear of a subject. Like, one example I would bring up is the topic of marketing. Try creating an outline for the topic of marketing. What should be Roman numeral 1? Should it be advertising because it starts with the letter A, or should we talk about word of mouth marketing, internet marketing? And it's more of, and you could apply that. I would say most topics that people study lend themselves more so to a nonlinear format. So you could take a topic like physics. Physics, you could talk about Isaac Newton and laws of motion. You could talk about Einstein's theories of relativity, quantum mechanics, but you can't really start with one or the other first. They're all kind of interrelated in a nonlinear way with the topic of physics. Same thing with law, contract law, constitutional law. There's a lot of different types of law associated with that big topic.
Yeah, that's a good point, because a mind map is actually also flow of information, right? So you've got your topic in the middle. So when you draw your mind map, you put your keyword or your main topic, or you draw your image in the middle, and then from there is branches and more keywords that are related to that information, and then from those little keywords come other sub keywords, and it keeps going and it keeps going and it keeps going. So, and this is how the brain sorts out information and learns and understands information, by correlating it and making correlations to other bits of information, right? So you've got a topic, and then its relation to other bits of information, and then the relation of that bit of information to other bits of information. So what I find actually really useful when I mind map something that I want to retain longer is in my mind map, I include images and keywords outside of the information that I'm reading. And the reason why I'm doing this is because there is relations and correlations to information outside of what you're reading. And by adding that information in your mind map, it'll aid in retention, right? And the easiest example is, let's just say we were talking about marketing. To me, there's a relation between marketing and sales. But let's just say that the book is just about marketing and it's not talking about sales. And I want to retain that information longer. I'll throw in some sales-related images and keywords, because it will help me understand that information better, right? So that's another thing too, is the mind map is specific to you. Your mind map will be totally different than my mind map.
Absolutely. And a lot of people, if you've ever had someone try to take notes for you in class, I know when I was a college student, you might miss a class and you tell your buddy, hey, can you take some notes for me? You ever look at these notes and find them completely useless? And the reason is because someone else took them, and it was based on what they were thinking at that time. And again, mind mapping is a great way to kind of get a visual reference to information that is, put forth in a text manner. And we are visual beings. It's just like this common phrase we've all heard, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Anytime you can depict something and make something a little more visual, it aids your comprehension, it helps you remember it better. So that's a great way. Mind mapping is a great way to kind of enhance your retention.
And to sum it all up, mind mapping is actually a representation of information that's in your brain. So when you mind map something, you're essentially redrawing that information or recreating that information, and you're visually looking at it again. The act of doing that will help you with retention, and you will be able to retain information longer.
Right. They've actually done studies on this, Joe, about, because they've known, researchers and professors especially have known that students will take notes. All of us, you ever take notes and never look at them again? All of us have done this, and they've done studies to see, okay, if you're taking notes and you never look at them again, what's the point of taking notes to begin with? Is it a waste of time? I mean, it's something, what they find through these studies is that even if you never look at your notes again, the fact that you wrote it down actually aids your memory. And the way that you write it down also matters, and this is why mind mapping is such a crucial tool.
Yep.
So I want to move on to the next topic here, if I can, Joe, and talk about mnemonic devices. Mnemonic devices are very commonly talked about on the topic of memory. And for those of you that aren't familiar, mnemonic devices you want to think of them as kind of like shortcuts. And a lot of times they're used as like acronyms. And it's a shortcut to remembering more information. So anytime you can create a mnemonic device, it will help you remember something. So for example, I'll give you one very common example of a mnemonic device, and it deals with the topic of the Great Lakes. In North America, you have these Great Lakes, Lake Michigan, and there's Lake Erie. And if you ask the average person that's semi-familiar with geography, what are the Great Lakes? How many are there? They might have a little bit of trouble remembering all of them, but a very simple way to remember them is by using a mnemonic device. Now, there are 5 Great Lakes, and they're represented by the mnemonic device HOMES, which is spelled H-O-M-E-S, HOMES. So if you can just remember that the Great Lakes correspond to the acronym HOMES, when you remember HOMES, for those of you listening, the letter H, which Great Lake would be represented by the letter H? A lot of you are probably thinking Lake Huron, right? And let's take the letter O in the word HOMES. Which lake is represented by the letter O? And a lot of us will think of, oh yeah, that's Lake Ontario, which is right by you, Joe, in Toronto. And then we take the letter M in the word HOMES, and we say, okay, M. Oh, that's Lake Michigan, and I can remember that because I live in Chicago, and Lake Michigan is right there for us. And then I think about the letter E, which is the E in the word HOMES. Oh yeah, Lake Erie, and the letter S in the word HOMES, and I remember Lake Superior. Now, normally, if I couldn't remember the acronym HOMES, which stands for Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, and Superior, I would probably have some trouble recalling all of the lakes, even though I know them. I know that I've got them in my head because at some point I've looked at a map numerous times and I've seen all of those lakes there. But mnemonic devices, anytime you can create one, so if you've got to remember information or specific key points or keywords or topics, if you could break it down to an acronym that's easy to remember, that could be a good way of doing it. One other example of a mnemonic device, I remember when I was little and we were learning about the compass and how there's north, south, east, and west. Our teacher told us, okay, here's how you remember north, south, east, and west. She told us, remember this little rhyme, never eat sour wheat. That's another example of a mnemonic device. So, again, little shortcuts to helping you remember information. And you know what, we could go into, we're not going to go into it here because there's a few other topics we want to talk about in regards to retention, but mnemonic devices are a great way to kind of again, I think of them as shortcuts to remembering information. And you know what? What we'll do in a future podcast, we'll actually dedicate a future podcast entirely to mnemonic devices, because I think it's a pretty important topic, and there's a lot of ways that you can kind of spin it.
Yeah, that's very important. Again, the theme of our workshops and our podcasts in general, you'll find, is reading strategies and using strategies. Different types of strategies to help you read faster and retain information longer. So you'll notice that we're going to be talking a lot about these kind of techniques. And they're beneficial because little things like this, as simple as they sound, make a big difference when it comes to retaining information.
Right. And you know what, there's a great application that I know we wanted to talk about. Joe, you'll talk about it in a moment. Before you talk about that application, I want to talk about one more topic here with retention, and it deals with, reading and your retention, and how can you actually improve your ability to recall information. Now, when you think about your memory when you're reading, I want you to think about it in two ways. There's retention, that's one way, and then there's the recall, that's number two, another way. Think of it kind of like input and output. Retention is your input. You read something and it's retained, it's inside of your head. Recall is, can you actually talk about what you read? Now, sometimes we've retained the information, but we have trouble recalling it. I like to refer to this as something that I call we can't remember what we actually remembered. That's the problem when you can't recall. You have it in your head, but you can't recall. This has happened to any student that's ever crammed for a test. I think if you've studied like crazy, and then you get to a question on your test, and you're like, oh, geez, I know the answer to this. What is it? What is it? And you're it's almost like you're searching your brain. And when does it happen that you figure it out, right?
Yeah, that happened to a friend of mine. She was taking like a really challenging nursing exam, and she studied like an insane amount, and then the actual day of the test, she totally blanked out and couldn't remember anything, and she ended up failing the test and having to explain herself, and they luckily gave her another chance at it, but that can happen.
And it's really frustrating because it's not like you don't know the information. You've got it in your head, but the trouble is the recall part. So you've retained it, and now you need the recall. So I want to talk about how you can actually train yourself to recall information better. And one simple way to do this, if you want to think of this as maybe homework for today's podcast, I don't think we're going to be assigning homework for future podcasts, but if you want to think of...
we don't even assign homework in our workshops.
We don't. I sometimes give students optional homework.
We just tell them
exactly
they should be practicing.
Here's a good way to practice to improve your recall, because you want to think of your recall as a muscle. It's a muscle that you can train and improve. So here's an exercise you can try. Try reading, take out a book and read a paragraph, and once you're done with that paragraph, cover it up with your hand and try to remember, create a mind map, and write down the main point of the paragraph and maybe 2 or 3 details that you can remember. Now make sure that you're being brief. Don't write down, this paragraph is about blah, 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 one long sentence. You just want to write down in a word or two, what is this about? And then you write down 2 or 3 details. Now, after you're done with that, you read another paragraph, and you do this exact same thing. What is it about? The simple question, what's it about? And then a couple details. Next paragraph. I read another paragraph, what's it about, and some details. And by doing this kind of paragraph by paragraph, this is actually a really good way to strengthen your reading retention, because you're constantly, while you're reading, you're thinking about, okay, I actually have to commit this to memory and remember it. And by writing these things down constantly, it's a really good way to train yourself and kind of use your recall and train it like a muscle. And the more you do this, the better your recall gets.
Yep. Okay, so, and on that topic of strengthening your recall muscle, I want to talk about a great website that you guys can visit and train your ability to recall the muscle, the mental muscle, so to speak. The website's called Lumosity. There's a link on speedreadingzone.com on the right-hand side to the website. Just click there and go over to the website, and you can sign up for a free account over there, a free trial account. And I recommend that you play this one game on there. It's called Memory Matrix. And what it is it starts off at the level where it shows you about 9 different squares, and then they flip over, and it shows you three. So the squares they're white, and three squares flip over, and you're supposed to remember where those squares were, and then you respond back to it. And then if you pass that level, it then goes on to like 12 squares and keeps going. So the idea behind this is you're working that recall muscle, and you want to see how many squares you can remember. So eventually it'll go from like 3 to 4 to 7 to 8. And it gets really challenging after 7 squares. It's like this thing in our brain where we have a hard time remembering after 7. That's why we've got 7 digits in a phone number. But you play this game long enough and you do this regularly, and you'll actually improve. I'm a member of Lumosity, and I play a number of different games on here to not only improve my memory, but there's attention, flexibility, problem solving, speed, all kinds of games. And there's tons of research that they've done on this and how it slows down or reduces Alzheimer's and just a whole bunch of things. And actually, I met a woman who used these games to help her recover from some brain damage that she had in an accident. Yeah.
Interesting.
So really interesting stuff, how these games can improve the functionality of your brain and keep it healthy. So I highly recommend that you check out Lumosity and play these games, because they will help. I find it personally. I've been playing them for about a year now. And lately I've really amped it up with these games just because I've noticed a big difference.
That's interesting. You know, I used to play those games just because they were fun, but the fact that there's some benefit to my brain, I think, increases the incentive for me to play more of those games. Again, if you want to check out the free trial of Lumosity, go to speedreadingzone.com. And you said, Joe, it's over on the right-hand side, right?
Yeah, I've put a link up on there so you can check it out.
Well, that's great. You know, that reminds me of this topic because I've been doing a lot of research into memory recently, and it reminds me of this topic of neuroplasticity. And the neuroplasticity has to do with the idea that your brain can actually be fundamentally and physically changed by doing different types of memory exercises. And I was, looking into Lumosity. There's actually some scientific basis into playing these kind of games. And that it affects your brain on the physical level. And by playing these kind of games and kind of challenging yourself, it's like they say, if you don't use it, you'll lose it, right? And by challenging yourself to improve your retention or, play these kind of games, it's a great way to kind of, not just with older people, but with younger people as well. Right, Joe?
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I've noticed a big difference using Lumosity, and there's tons of other sites and games out there that are like this. And that's actually a benefit that you get from increasing your reading speed too, because you're really working the brain harder. You're training your brain to read faster, take in information faster. So going back, Accelerator will also have an impact the same way these Lumosity games have. And so I highly recommend that you guys check out one of our workshops. There's probably a workshop happening in your city, anywhere in the U.S., and also in Toronto. If you take the class in Toronto, most likely I will be teaching the class. We've got 2 other instructors, but you can request to have me in as an instructor, and they'll put you in a class.
Yeah, and again, you can check out, go to irisreading.com to see the full schedule. Again, Joe teaches a lot of the classes out there in Toronto. He's also going to be bouncing around to a number of the different cities that we're doing here in the States.
I'm looking forward to teaching the San Diego class.
That's right.
Especially in the wintertime in Toronto, because it gets pretty cold down here.
Hey, you know what? I hear you out here in Chicago. I love the city of Chicago, but I can't stand the weather. It's always too hot or too cold here. And I definitely enjoy coming out to San Diego and Los Angeles where we do our classes. But again, if you're trying to figure out exactly where Joe or myself will be teaching a class, you can actually get in touch with our customer support at irisreading.com, and they'll give you a heads up as to where we're going to be.
So how many classes, like how many different cities is Iris running the workshop? And these are weekend workshops, 5-hour workshops.
Right. They're typically Saturday and Sunday that we do them. Typically from 10 o'clock to 3. A few breaks here and there in between, but we get a lot of information and we cover a lot, and we do a lot of drills and exercises during the sessions. But we're doing them in 21 cities as of today. All the major cities in the U.S., in Canada right now, we're only in Toronto, but we are planning to do a few more cities in Canada. And Yeah, it's really the funny thing. Over the last year, we've really expanded. A little over a year ago, we were just doing these classes in Chicago, and over the last year, we're now in 21 cities. So, again, thanks to a lot of people that are listening to our podcast may have taken one of our classes in the past. Thank you guys for attending and kind of spreading the word. We're really trying to get these skills out to as many students and professionals as possible.
Yeah, and we've taught the same workshop that we're putting out on the weekends to the Google staff, Walmart, HSBC, Stanford University, and we're featured on NBC also.
And also, let's not forget Harvard. The funny thing is, when I went to Harvard, I didn't go to an Ivy League school or anything like that. I went to school in Chicago at DePaul University. That's where I graduated from. And when I first did a workshop at Harvard, I was a little intimidated because, I was going in there and I'm like, man, these guys are going to be geniuses in the class. And, everybody... You
thought they were going to be schooling you on speed reading.
Exactly. I was like, who am I to come in? And, no, we did this workshop, and, it was great because I actually hung out with some of the students in the sponsoring organization that was putting it on. Really, really great people. And this workshop that we did, I looked at the averages in that class because we had like 50 people attend this Harvard workshop. And the averages corresponded to what we see at a lot of different colleges and universities across the U.S. And I think it kind of shows that, your reading skills, a lot of people learn to read exactly the same way. And nothing's wrong with that, but I always like to ask my students in my class, when was the last time you learned how to read? And, Joe, when was the last time most people learned how to read?
We're kids.
Yeah, exactly.
Our parents.
We're kids. And, the Iris Reading Program is by no means a hooked on phonics program. The people that come to this program are usually, they're already pretty good readers. I mean, otherwise they wouldn't be in, college or a grad school program or a serious professional. So the reason they come to take our class is because they, not only do they have a lot of reading to do, they have very, very limited time. And learning speed reading techniques, you want to think of it as a tool. It's a great way. I think of it as a time management tool. If you can just double your reading speed and you're reading, 20, 30, 40 hours a week, that cuts your time in half. For me, that's more time to sleep. That's more time to hang out with friends or family or, maybe, pursue some kind of other interests. But again, this is by no means a hooked on phonics kind of program. These are advanced level reading skills.
So what kind of results should someone expect from taking one of these classes?
Typically what we see in the 5-hour class, we can get someone to double or triple their speed with similar or better comprehension just in that 5 hours.
That's really amazing because we cover the best concepts out there on speed reading. We do a lot of exercises and we cover all these techniques and strategies as well as like a lot more. We put it all in a 5-hour workshop. And on that note, we should wrap up this call. But before we do that, I just want to let you guys know that we do have a promo, as I mentioned earlier, where you can get 25% off any one of the classes in any city that it's taught at. Just during the checkout, and Google checkout is kind of funny because you have to enter your credit card information, and then it lets you enter the special promo code. But don't worry, it's not going to bill your card until like a step after that.
Right. So you enter your credit card info first, and then after that, it'll give you a confirmation screen that says, okay, do you have a coupon code? You enter the coupon code speedreadingzone.com, and that'll give you 25% off. And
so that's $199 for a workshop, and you're going to save about $50 there. That's great.
And you know what? Another thing I want to mention while we're on the call here, we are just about to launch our online course, and that's going to be available at irisreading.com. So if you're the online course, we don't have the pricing on it just yet, but it will be a little less expensive than the regular class. You can use speedreadingzone.com as a promo code for the online course as well. For example, we're in a number of cities in the U.S. and Canada, but we might not be in your particular city. But we have the entire class recorded, and it's got a number of supplemental materials, and you could actually take the class online. So if you want to check that out, go to irisreading.com. Speedreadingzone.com is a coupon code that you would use at checkout. That'll give you 25% off. And I also want to mention one more thing since we've got the topic of retention as part of the podcast today. Recently wrote an article that you could find on our website, and it has to do with, the title is 30 Tips to Improve Your Memory. And if you want to check out the article, it's completely free. You don't have to sign up for it. You don't have to pay for it. You just go to irisreading.com/articles, and you'll be able to find it right there.
Great stuff, and also a lot of great free information on my speed reading zone.com blog. And if there's a topic that you want me to write about in relations to reading faster, comprehension, and retention, also, Paul, what was that number again?
The number, if you want us to talk about it here at the podcast or on Joe's blog, you can leave a comment on Joe's blog, or you can call us at 315-313-4747. You can leave a voicemail there, and we'll try to make we're hoping to hear some feedback from you guys, and we want to hear some questions. We want to answer those questions in a future podcast. Again, 315-313-4747, or email us with your questions at podcast@irisreading.com.
Okay, and also on my blog, you can click on the contact button on the menu there, and you can enter your question or comments, and I'll get back to you on that.
Or you could call Joe on his cell phone, and we won't call him at 1 a.m. and see if he'll pick up.
Yeah,
Joe, I got a question about reading.
Yeah, very passionate. That'll wake me up right out of bed, and yeah. I'll tell you, I get emails and comments all throughout the night, and I do sometimes. I'm guilty of responding back to emails.
I think all of us have done that at one point, where you're up late at night, and you're like, let me check my email. And
that's going to be
responded to me one time. They're like, why are you replying to this email at 2 a.m.? I'm like, I just happen to be in front of a computer screen.
So I don't do that a lot, okay? So this is just a little bit I do that because one of the things we should talk about, and we are going to talk about in one of our later podcasts, is time management as far as reading goes. So that's going to be an exciting one. So just subscribe to this podcast. Stay tuned. Look for more podcasts. We're going to be talking about more topics in relation to speed reading, and we're going to be giving away a ton of information. So it's definitely worth checking out.
Absolutely. Well, good talking to you, Joe, and thank you all to the listeners that are listening in here. If you like this podcast, please tell your friends. If you didn't like it, tell your enemies about it. Thank you all for joining us. Have a good one.